Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to the Iron Maidens on Normal and Heroic difficulty in the Blackrock Foundry.
Yes, this fight is pretty cool. It's really awesome. You fight 3 different bosses with 3 different sets of mechanics, and at points you go on top of a ship, and you gotta like kill people on a ship, otherwise everyone gets blown up. It's pretty fucking crazy.
Yeah, but it is a very long one.
Yeah, it's about a 13-minute long fight when you're doing it. Yeah, and there's a lot to get through, so let's kick it off.
So for this encounter, you do want to bring 2 tanks, and a 10-man bring 2 or 3 healers, and a 30-man bring around 5 healers, and bring a good mixture of range and melee DPS. Now, as Alex said, the encounter does consist of 3 bosses, each with a separate health pool and all with separate mechanics. And it is extremely important that you know exactly how all the abilities work in order to defeat the encounter.
Now, the only thing the bosses share is an energy bar. All the bosses start at 0 energy and very slowly gain energy throughout the fight. It's about 1 energy every 6 or so seconds, so it takes a long time for them to get to 100 energy. Now, at set energy levels, they will actually gain new abilities, so the bosses do become more and more difficult as the fight goes on. So we're going to go through each and every boss and what they do at set energy intervals and what you need to do to counter them, and first off we'll talk about Marak the Blooded.
Now, Marak the Blooded does in fact have a threat table, so it does need to be tanked. She'll do an ability called Blood Ritual, where she'll target this on a random player and create a beam between herself and that player. It's like a squiggly red beam. Once the cast is over, she'll do a load of shadow damage in front of her in a cone, but also with this ability she will hit the first target between her and the debuff target, dealing a large amount of physical damage. This means that you need to have your tank positioned so they are the closest person within the beam that connects Marak and the debuff player. And of course, this means melee, you need to be very careful. This ability will one-hit you. Make sure it's always on your tank.
Now, you may want to set a location in the room for players to move to in order to make sure that the shadow damage doesn't hit a lot of people, and tanks always know where that target will be. Do take into account that melee also can be targeted by this spell, so melee, you can't just AFK this, you do need to know what's going on, and you can actually feign death and spectral guys and all that kind of shit, this ability, and it will go on cooldown and it won't go off. Now, at 30 energy, which is around 3 minutes into the fight, she will gain an ability called Blood-Soaked Heartseeker. Now, she will debuff 3 players in the raid, and after the debuff has expired, she will throw an axe at one of them. Then this axe will bounce to the second player, and then the third. Now, this axe does a huge amount of damage, however, the damage is reduced dramatically depending on the distance it travelled, so the longer it takes to travel to each player, the less damage it does.
So it's very important that when this does come out and you guys do have the debuffs, you get the fuck away from each other, otherwise you could potentially be one hit.
And it's also important that you also move away from Marak, because if you are the first target, the distance between you and her does take into account the actual axe damage. So pretty much move away from everyone with this ability and you'll be absolutely fine.
Now, she will gain another ability at 100 energy, but we'll talk about that towards the end of the guide and we'll go over all the bosses together at that point. Now, Admiral Gar'an does not need to be tanked and will just spam an ability called Iron Shot. This just deals a little bit of physical damage to a completely random target and is unavoidable. Just top it up. Now, at 0 energy, right from the start, she'll have something called Rapid Fire.
Now, this will fixate on a player and place a little circle on them. After a short time, she will start firing out high explosive rounds that will deal damage within that circle. So what you need to do is kite the circle away. You do have a small window to realize that the circle is on you and to start moving, because it doesn't activate immediately, and the circle doesn't move very quickly, so it is easy to outrun. Try not to kite this circle over anyone, and once again, this can target melee, so melee, make sure you are mega quick, because there's so many people on top of you that you're just going to fucking kill anyone.
At 30 energy, she'll gain Penetrating Shot. This will create a straight red beam between her and a random target, so make sure you don't get this mixed up with a Blood Ritual ability. And after 6 seconds, she'll shoot a bolt at them that deals huge physical damage. Anyone stood in the beam can intercept the damage and cause it to be split between all players within the beam. So when someone gets targeted by this, you want as many players as possible to stand in the beam just to reduce the amount of damage everyone takes.
Now, once again, you might want to set up a meeting point for this, so you don't all have to run around like headless chickens trying to stack up in a line, but also you can immune this damage, as well as use huge damage reductions, making it so people don't have to stack. And once again, if you use Feign Death or Spirit Guys, it will put this ability in cooldown, it won't go off, as well as Hand as Protection works as well. You can just,
which is super weird.
Yeah, it's really useful though, especially in another phase we'll talk about in a minute, but it's really nice to know. Now, the last boss that you need to worry about is Enforcer Sorka, and this boss does need to be tanked. The ability that she has right from the start is something called Blade Dash. Now this will jump to a player within 45 yards and deal physical damage to them. And then she will attempt to jump to another player within 8 yards of that player and do the exact same thing. And she'll just continue to jump until no new targets are available. And of course she can't jump between 2 targets over and over again. She can only jump 1 per Blade Dash. So make sure that you can try and keep relatively spread out for this ability. It generally will not go on melee, but if range can be spread around 8 yards, it will help reduce the raid damage, but it's not a huge amount of damage it will deal to you. It's just kind of annoying and there.
Now at 30 energy, she'll gain an ability called Convulsive Shadows. When she casts this, it will place a debuff on a random player that has 5 stacks. This debuff is kind of weird. The way that it works is that it deals damage every 2 seconds. Each time this debuff deals damage to you, a stack will actually be removed, but it is a magical effect, so you can in fact dispel it. However, if you do dispel it, it will do whatever the remaining stack's worth of damage that would have been done instantly.
So really, with this debuff, leave it.
Yeah, just heal it.
It's
never dispel it, you'll one-hit that person.
Pretty much, that's it. So they are all the abilities that you need to deal with for the majority of the fight. As we said, the bosses do gain 1 extra ability at 100%, but we'll cover that later. Now, one major mechanic in this fight is actually dealing with the ship. 1 minute into the fight and every 3 minutes thereafter, the boss with the lowest health pool, who has yet to go up on the ship, will leave the encounter area and jump onto the ship. Now players have about 1:30 to follow that boss onto the ship, deal with all the mechanics on the ship, and then stop the boss from using the main cannon, which will destroy the raid.
Now when one of the bosses does go up onto the ship, 6 hooks will spawn behind the encounter area. This might depend on your raid size, but we had 6. And what you need to do is have players run over and simply click on them and it will take them over to it. Do note that you can only use 1 hook once per ship phase, meaning that you can only send 6 players over each time. Now depending on what boss jumps over onto the ship will depend on what you actually need to send over in order to deal with that boss so they don't use the main cannon.
Now when Marak boards the ship, you will need to kill Urug. The fuck knows, the big fella, before you can stop her from blowing up the raid. Now all this fella does, he does need to be tanked, so he has his melee hit in the tank. However, he has no other mechanics except he causes players to periodically spawn little circles underneath them, and after a short time these circles will activate and deal a huge amount of ticking damage to anyone that is stood inside. So this means that you need to pretty much move every 3 or so seconds, and with this in mind, it's best to send up as many mobile DPS you can up there, because of course if you have standstill casters, they're not going to be doing enough damage to this fella, and having more than 1 melee DPS can cause issues because otherwise there'll be too many pulls in melee and it's just going to become a mess. You also do need to send a healer up at this point, as the tank will be taking damage from the mob. It's really good if you can send up a druid healer because they can cast on the move and all that kind of stuff, but any healer should be able to out-heal this damage.
Now once he dies, you need to activate the bombs at the end of the ship, which are sort of like on a rotating conveyor belt style thingy. I don't even know what the fuck's going on with that. You click on that and you get sent back down. However, there is timing involved with this. We'll get to that in a minute. Now when Gar'an goes on top of a ship, you'll need to deal with 2 mobs, Ukhtar and a battle medic. Now Ukhtar will just spam an ability called Grape Shot, which is just a frontal cone that deals damage to anyone that's in front of it. What you need to make sure is that you just spread all players around that mob. And the battle medic will just cast something called Earthen Barrier every 7 seconds or so, which will just place a massive healing shield on top of Ukhtar. Make sure you interrupt this.
The battle medic will also cast lightning bolt and chain lightning. These are really nothing to worry about. However, you do want to interrupt him initially, so you can get him to come over and stack with Ukhtar, so you can make interrupts easier.
Now, because you don't actually need to tank anything up here, we just send 1 healer and as many melee DPS as we can, as generally melee DPS, of course, are probably the best interrupters. Now, you only need to actually kill Ukhtar up here to gain access to the bombs at the end of the ship so you can get off. So you don't need to do anything with Battle Medic, just make sure you keep interrupting him.
Now when Enforcer Sorka boards the boat, you need to deal with Gorak and his Iron Eviscerators. Now Gorak himself does need to be tanked, and he will do an ability called Deadly Throw. This will throw a knife in the direction of a targeted player, and this knife will deal fairly high physical damage and slow them for 5 seconds. And this knife can actually be intercepted, so tanks, you need to stand in the direction where this knife is being thrown.
On top of this, there'll also be ads that are spawning called Eviscerators. All these ads will do is just fixate on a target and start melee hitting them, and each time they melee hit, there's a chance they'll apply a stacking debuff that increase the amount of physical damage you take by 10%. All we do for Gorak is just stack up right underneath him, making sure that we're not too close to the tank so he can easily soak the deadly throw, while cleaving off the ads. You make sure you kill the ads first, because of this stacking physical damage buff, if it gets too high, you just end up getting 1 hit. So we send up 1 tank, 1 healer, and just all the DPS that we send up, we just destroy the ads as soon as we possibly can. And as soon as Gorak dies, you'll then gain access to the bombs and you'll be able to end the boat phase. Now during every boat phase, the rest of the raid will also have to deal with the remaining 2 bosses and all their abilities. However, you will also be bombarded by bombs from the ship. These bombs will land and explode a while after, and when they land they'll deal high damage and knock you up. And when they finally explode, they do a huge amount of damage, and these bombs come down in 2 separate waves.
So what you need to do in order to counter this is that the first wave will come down in a couple of locations, so make sure you move from those locations. However, then the second wave will fill every single possible spot in the room with bombs, so what you need to do is move into the location of the first bombs. Then the first bomb waves will now start to explode, so you need to move to where the second bomb wave just landed, and then finally the second bomb wave will now start to explode, so you move into the gaps left by the first bomb wave. That sounded complicated. The video will help. It's fine.
Watch the video and understand.
And you just keep doing this over and over until the people on the boat come back and the fight continues like normal.
Now, when you're making the choice to actually come back over from the boat after you've cleared all the mobs, you need to make sure that the room is relatively clear of bombs before you click up on the bombs on the actual ship to bring you back. If you come back at a bad time, you may potentially land on a wave of bombs and just instantly die. So you need to make sure that you communicate with the rest of your raid and they can tell you exactly when you need to click on it.
Now, as the boss with the lowest health who hasn't been on the boat yet will be the one to board the boat next, you do actually get to choose which order you want them to board the ship, and it doesn't really matter a ton. However, you really want the person who has the 30 energy ability that's like the easiest to handle to board the ship first, as they will always be active during the boat phases when the bosses are past this threshold. So we decided to go with Marak, then Gar'an, then Sorka. However, once again, this is up to you.
One thing to note is that when you are doing the boat phase with Gar'an still in the encounter area and she is above 30% energy, she will be casting Penetrating Bolt. And soaking this while all the bombs are coming down is a complete pain in the arse. So this is where you want to start bopping people and people using Spectral Guise and Feign Death, all those sort of things, just so you don't have to deal with that particular mechanic at all. Now throughout the fight you need to be keeping the bosses at similar health numbers. You don't want to just nuke down a single mob. And this is because if any boss is brought below 20% health, all the bosses will suddenly gain 100% energy and will start gaining a debuff called Iron Will. This just flat out increases the amount of damage they deal, and it just stacks and stacks and stacks. Therefore, you need to make sure that you keep all the bosses at similar health so you can bring them all below that 20% threshold around the same time. Otherwise, it can just become a mess.
Now, if you actually manage to get a boss down to below 20% health before like the third ship phase, they will not actually board the ship at all. So if you do actually want to try and nuke down one of the bosses before that point, then good luck, I suppose. It's all to do with your DPS, but it can mean you do actually skip a whole boat phase. So if you can pull it off, good luck, have fun, see if you can do it. But generally, we decided just to wait it out until that third ship phase was over.
So ideally, you want to get to all the bosses to around 25% health and then start nuking down one of them just to kill it as soon as possible. The one that we really recommend you nuke down first is Marak, because at 100% energy she gains a really annoying ability called Sanguine Strikes. Each melee attack that she deals to the tank also deals a portion of that damage to the entire raid. And as she's getting a stacking damage buff from Iron Will, this is going to start fucking hurting towards the end of the fight. So you want to get her out the way as soon as possible before the raid just gets flat out one hit. The next boss that we switch to is Gar'an, because at 100 energy she'll start placing down turrets. When she places this turret down, it'll actually start spinning around on the spot and start sending out firebolts across the room. If you're hit by these firebolts, you take a load of damage and you also get a dot. This dot does in fact stack, so you really need to make sure that you do avoid these. And when these turrets spawn, you need to make sure you blow them up as soon as possible. And melee, you really want to switch as well. Just literally have your entire raid switch onto them and just kill them as soon as you can.
And this even applies while Marak is up. Even though you're single target nuking down Marak, these turrets are such a pain in the ass, and if you get more than one, you're fucked. Make sure you do take them down over everything else.
And the last person that we are to nuke down is Sorka, and this bitch at 100% energy has something called Dark Hunt.
This will debuff a player for 8 seconds, and after the debuff expires, she will shadow step to them and deal a fairly large amount of physical damage to them. So make sure the players... like, Sorka's so shit, thinking about it. She does, like, absolutely nothing.
Yeah, she's a pretty shit boss. But that's pretty much all you need to do. It's just this last phase is really, really mental. You really want to use your healing cooldowns while Marika's up, especially towards the end of her life, where she has a higher Iron Will stack, so she's doing more damage to the raid. But as soon as she's dead, things start to calm down. Yeah. Providing you can dodge the turrets and you actually do keep people topped up for the shadow step, there's not a whole lot that can go wrong after that point. It's just getting her dead and the others not being on a ridiculously high amount of health. I mean, they should be on less than 20% each at that point as soon as Marak has died. But that's more or less the fight. Obviously, there's so much you need to know in order to kill this boss. A lot of it's trial and error, especially while you're learning the fight. But knowing these abilities is key because they're actually really, really easy to deal with. But if you don't deal with them, they're extremely punishing.
Yeah.
A lot of one-hit mechanics and stuff like that.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you leave us a like. It helps us out a lot. And if you'd like to see any of our other Blackrock Foundry heroic guides, then make sure you do click up on the annotations you see on your screen now. Then it'll take you straight to those videos.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.